All right, by show of hands, how many of you have had a job at some point or currently have a job? Just about everybody. I'm sure all of you have the same assumption that if you have a job and you perform services for a company, bring them money, you should be paid for your services, correct? Pretty agreeable. What if I told you that there was a multi-billion-dollar industry that wasn't paying its employees? You'd be pretty shocked. But the National Collegiate Athletic Association is just that. It brings in billions of dollars each year, but as its employees, the players, compete as amateurs for no pay. I've been a fan of sports for my whole life, specifically college sports, and so this has been something that's interested me for a long time. And all of you, as college students, some athletes, some friends of athletes, but certainly as people going into the business world, you should be concerned about this as well. College players should be paid for their efforts, and in this speech, I'll attempt to persuade you to feel the same way. According to Greg Lush, who's a law professor at the University of Southern California, he states that the NCAA generated just north of $912 million this past year. That's a lot of money. 81% of that was from selling media rights, such as television, radio, things like that, broadcast of games. And the remainder came mostly from ticket sales, merchandise sales, things like that. The NCAA is a nonprofit organization, so most of the revenue does go back to its member institution, the universities. And as Richard Karcher at Eastern Michigan says, Turner Broadcasting and CBS signed a 14-year, $10.8 billion contract with the NCAA for the exclusive right to the men's basketball March Madness tournament that all of us know all about, generating about $770 million in annual revenue just for the NCAA. And the college football playoff agreement is just about the same, 12 years, $7.3 billion. The conferences have their own television contracts with networks that bring in anywhere between $13 and $21 million annually for each of the conferences, you can see. As you can see here, the conference is bringing quite a bit of money. Edward Grimmett of Touro College writes that along with TV broadcasts, some of this money comes from merchandising, jerseys, things like that. The NCAA is prohibited from selling jerseys with a player's name on the back because they're not paid employees. However, this random number system doesn't always work because a quick Google search for your favorite college athlete will return their jersey on the university's website. So it doesn't seem like this is really working that much. States in the United States have enacted rights of publicity statutes to protect the misappropriation of an individual's image. Using a player's number on the jersey of his corresponding school is arguably a misappropriation in itself. The second restatement of torts, which is an official U.S. law treatise, states, one who appropriates to his own use or benefit the name or likeness of another is subject to liability to the other for invasion of his privacy. If this was anything else besides college jerseys, I'm sure everybody would agree with this. So why should it be any different? Many states recognize that an individual's likeness is a property right because the individual has developed this value of his or her image through hard work over a long period of time. Essentially, this means that the NCAA is depriving these athletes of their own property. According to William Hothaus, an attorney from St. Louis, the collegiate athletes all do sign an agreement before they agree to participate in sports. Form 083A states, you authorize the NCAA to use your name or picture to generally promote NCAA championships or other NCAA events, activities, or programs. However, the term generally promote is probably intentionally left pretty vague. And that's all that it says. Robert Brown at California State University, he tries to combat this by saying that they do receive compensation because they get athletic scholarships, which amounts to room and board, tuition, fees, book allowances for classes, things like that. And the NCAA sets this maximum athletic scholarship value at $20,000. However, the typical one averages about $13,000. But this is not a consistent value because the tuition at schools is different. For instance, BYU tuition is less than $5,000, but Stanford is probably 10 times that. So it's not the same amount at each school. So that the value of that might be different. And also, it could be argued that a degree from Stanford is much better than a degree from a community college. So it's not uniform, is what I'm saying. These full ride scholarships, as defined by the NCAA bylaws, are tuition and fees, room and board, and required course-related books. But there are also other expenses such as transportation, school supplies, things like that that are not covered. This was calculated to be about $3,000 for each player that they're spending out of pocket on their own. And these full-ride scholarships can be rescinded by the NCAA at any time without cause. If a player gets injured, say tears his knee, is out for the season, his scholarship can be revoked, and he's not going to college anymore, and he's not playing sports anymore. That's why many colleges employ the one-year scholarship program, where it's 1 year at a time. If you perform well in the first year, you get your second year, and so on and so forth. However, if you perform poorly on the field, for instance, and are benched, you could still have your scholarship revoked. And that's your so-called compensation for your job. So where does all this money go? Edward Grimmett did a study comparing NCAA to professional sports, such as the NFL. In the NFL's collective bargaining agreement, the players are required to receive at least 46.5%. It's stated in their contracts. They've bargained with the league for this, and every year they receive 46.5% of the revenue generated by the league. If we were to take this percentage, 46.5, and apply it to the NCAA's revenue of $912 million, minus the cost of the scholarships, which is their so-called payment, Division I football players, on average, each individual player lost $456,000 over 4 years. Now that may not seem like a living for 4 years, but $100,000+ a year that you could be having, it makes a dent. To further illustrate this point, here's a little quick math I did for you guys. For basketball and football teams in Division I, basketball and football generates about 60% of the revenue for all of NCAA Division I sports. That's why I've only included those two. But there are obviously other sports that generate revenue. But if you take the number of teams and the set number of scholarships per team, and then I'd multiply it by the average scholarship for each of the sports. So there's a little wiggle room with this. But you can see that for the entire calendar year, this is how much money in scholarships basketball athletes and football athletes are granted by the NCAA as their payment. When you compare it to all the money generated by the NCAA last year, it's about 27%, compared to 46.5% for the NFL. A little bit unfair. So in conclusion, paying college athletes, I think, will solve a lot of problems. Since the NCAA prides itself on being an amateur sport, not a professional sport, there can't be this normal salary thing where your salary is determined by your skill, your performance, things like that. You're compared to other people, because then it would just be professional sports, and what's the difference? But if there was a uniform amount given to all players, just to cover their other expenses, to safeguard against injury, things like that, I think this would be satisfactory for everybody. Athletes work too hard at their craft and take on serious risks when participating in sports. Their career could be over on any play. And similar to how you guys wouldn't want to be taken advantage of in your workplace, or whatever workplace you choose to work in the future, college athletes should be compensated the same and protected. Thanks.